And the final item of business today is a members' business debate on motion number 5922 in the name of John Mason on bank branch closures. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put. And I'd invite those members who wish to speak in the debate, please press the request to speak buttons now or as soon as possible, and indeed those leaving the chamber to do so as quietly as possible. Now call on John Mason to open the debate. 7 minutes, please. Mr Mason.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you to all members who have given me the opportunity to have this debate today. Some time ago, the Royal Bank of Scotland announced that they were closing the Bridgeton branch within my Glasgow Shettleston constituency, and in fact they did carry that out earlier this year. And to some extent, I think we accepted it. It was inevitable. There were cuts going on across the board in society and in the banks, and perhaps not much of a fight was put up to that. However, in the very same week that they had closed that branch, they then announced that they would also be closing the Shettleston branch as well. No consultation, no asking for opinions, just a decision that had already been made. And I have to say that this time I was really furious about this. This would leave only one branch of the Royal Bank in my constituency, which includes some 70,000 people. And to be fair, RBS did agree to meet me and told me how wonderful the one remaining branch would be, and even they had a machine there that would give out £5 notes. Well, that's really wonderful, isn't it? About the same time, I was attending a meeting of Sandy Hill's Community Council, and I quickly picked up that it wasn't just myself that was seriously upset about all this, but the community as a whole was furious about the RBS decision as well. So we agreed to put together a petition and collected over 1,000 signatures, both from local residents and others who came into the area, often specifically to use this branch of the bank. Because it's not just the bank's own customers, individuals and businesses who suffer in a situation like this. The danger is that footfall drops for all the other shops in the area and causes problems for a number of other businesses, including the credit union, which is very close by. Now, members may be aware that Labour and the SNP do not always have the closest of relationships in the East End of Glasgow. In fact, we virtually do nothing together unless we are absolutely forced to. However, on this occasion, given the strength of feeling in the Community Council and among the wider public, I really felt that we had to try and bring everyone together on this issue. There's nothing like having a common enemy like RBS to draw normally antagonistic politicians together. So the campaign has been led by Sandy Hill's Community Council, supported by Shettleston and Tollcross Credit Union, and also by Margaret Curran MP, Frank McAvity, ex-MSP, myself and local councillors. Could I just say how important I feel that the role of community councils can be in issues like this? They are non-party political, they cover a smaller, distinct area than even city councillors do. And sure, I admit that I've had clashes with community councils in my time. However, this campaign has been an example of how they can be a real asset for a local community. Well, we got our petition together and cross-party, along with the Credit Union and the Community Council, we went to Gogarburn to hand in our petition. To be fair, they did accept it and were reasonably polite. However, I don't think they were exactly enthusiastic. So what are the bank's arguments for closing a branch like this? One argument is that there are fewer customers than there used to be. And of course, I can accept that numbers may be down a little bit. But if you go into that branch, as I do myself, and as others may have done, you will have to queue very often to get service in this branch. It is a busy bank branch. Another argument they give is that more customers are using online banking. And I'm afraid this is an argument that does upset me somewhat, because we know very clearly that in poorer areas, fewer people are online. In fact, Glasgow Housing Association has found that only 10% of social housing tenants have regular access to online facilities. And this has been one of our concerns, I think, across the parties, that with the DWP as another example, they have sought to move down this online route, which is clearly going to disadvantage many of our constituents. Many people do want to speak face-to-face, be it to their local politician, to their bank, to whoever it is that they are wanting to speak to. They do not want to do things online. That may well come in the future, but I would suggest we are a long way away from the situation where a majority of our constituents are going to be comfortable going online for a whole range of services. Presiding Officer, we debate finances in this Parliament often enough, be it government finances, organisations' finances or individuals' finances. And on many occasions in this Parliament, we do not agree with each other on these issues. However, I think there is broad agreement on some issues. For example, the need to improve financial education in our schools, not just amongst young people, but going beyond that into the wider community. Debt's been a huge problem right across society, and we all need to learn from mistakes that have been made in the past. Yes,
Neil Finlay.
I absolutely agree with him, the need to improve financial education in schools, but I have to tell him that very often in schools, it's RBS that's doing the education.
Absolutely, and I mean that's one of the very ironic points about that, and I have in fact been in a primary school, and to be fair, the local RBS staff, when I was in a primary school, St Anne's, were doing a perfectly good job in encouraging the kids. And I think I would want to make it clear here that the local staff are absolutely fine, and I'm sure that's true in virtually every branch of the RBS, but it's the top decision makers that I'm wanting to challenge here today. To close a branch in an area like this goes completely against the agenda that we are trying to achieve, as has just been mentioned, of financial education and trying to help people manage their finances better. Now, you might ask, are all the banks doing this as well as RBS? And the answer is no, they are not. Just within the last week, I was reading a Herald article on Santander where they specifically said that they were not closing branches. So if Santander do not need to close branches, I do not understand why RBS, which is much more embedded in our communities, needs to do so. And if there is one more thing that really infuriates me about all this, it is that we, the public, actually own the Royal Bank. It is not just any other bank. It is one that has been bailed out by the public purse. And you might just think that they owe some kind of extra duty to the public in return. And that is a point that is not lost on my constituents. So what is the RBS response to all of this? Well, they have offered us a further meeting to explain why they are closing this branch. No offer of a meeting to discuss if they should actually be closing it. Now, I do realise the government has very limited influence in all of this, but I would be grateful for any reassurance that the government does see this as an important issue and would raise it with Royal Bank, not just on behalf of my constituency, but of vulnerable constituents right across Scotland. And finally then, can we see any signs of improvement in the RBS attitude? Well, we have the report for 2012, which runs to many hundreds of pages, but I just selected one or two. And to be fair to them, there is an acceptance that they have got it wrong in the past. However, I'm concerned about where they seem to feel they are now. For example, one quote from page 8, headed Our Customers. Successful companies put their customers first. If they do not serve customers well, they have no purpose. Without satisfied customers, there is no return for shareholders, no jobs for employees, no sales for suppliers, and no taxes to support public services. Most of us at RBS get up every day with the aim of serving our customers well, unquote. Well, I'm afraid that most of us in Shettleston are not convinced that the decision makers in RBS are getting up every day with the aim of serving their customers well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on Neil Finlay to be followed by Richard Lyle. 4 minutes, please. Thanks
very much, Presiding Officer, and apologise, I also have to leave when I finish. I would like to thank John Mason very much for bringing this forward, this debate. There are many of us, like Mr Mason, who have a direct constituency interest in this issue, and indeed, given the volume of banking closures that are on the cards, I think there's hardly a town or village in Scotland that will be left unaffected. Mr Mason's motion specifically identifies RBS and in its current incarnation, this is a bank 81% nationalised, 81% owned by us, the taxpayer, and yet this is a bank acting like the most arrogant capitalists. A bank that still pays eye-watering bonuses to executives, last year 600 million, but at the same time imposing a measly 2% increase on the pay of staff. And that Klondike paid to those at the top at a time when they had overseen an IT disaster, a disaster where customers could not even access their own cash. This at a time when many of the same executives took decisions that resulted in a £390 million fine for LIBOR fixing and mis-selling. It wasn't the branch staff in Edinburgh or Livingston or Bathgate or Glasgow that caused this. It was those people at the top. And if this isn't a reward for failure, Presiding Officer, then I don't know what it is. But of course, it will be the workers in the branches and the communities affected that will lose their jobs in their banks and be made to suffer the consequences. In May, Sir Philip Hampton, the chairman of the bank, announced to the RBS AGM, like a starving man over a dripping roast, that the worst is over and the bank is ready for privatisation. Well, forgive me, Presiding Officer, for not jumping up and down with delight. I have to ask, where is the logic of nationalising the debt when the bank is in trouble and privatising the profit when it goes back into the black? It is economic madness. And of course, it's not just RBS that is up to these tricks. Lloyds Banking Group are getting rid of 1,300 staff across the UK and many in Scotland, and it's estimated that 40,000 jobs will go over the next 5 years. Jobs in their learning department, pensions, insurance and IT. And IT jobs being offshored on the back of a claim that there's an IT skills shortage. And once again, with Lloyds, like RBS, branch after branch will close. Aberdeen, Dundee, Edinburgh, Aberfeldy, Barrhead, Alloa, Bathgate, Carluke, Cowdenbeath. The list goes on and on and on. Presiding Officer, the banking crisis led me to believe that the banks would have mended their ways. On this evidence, no one can believe that this is to be the case. I would thank John Mason for bringing this forward, and unfortunately, I'm sure that many of us in the chamber will be deliberating and campaigning on these issues as the closure programme comes to a village or town near them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on Richard Lyle to be followed by Drew Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I begin by congratulating John Mason on bringing this to the Chamber today? An issue which will have an impact, no doubt, in the many lives of many people here in Scotland. Can I also, as an ex-employee of RBS, I refer members to my register of interests. I receive a pension from RBS. I worked for RBS for 10 years as a regional manager, and my whole division was made redundant by the bank in early 2000-2001. I'd like to begin by welcoming what John Mason has outlined in his speech, and agree that Parliament should be disappointed in these closures, and particularly because the people who it will affect most, the public, were indeed the very ones who saved the RBS Bank when the financial crisis happened. I also note that John Mason mentions the following point, that is, that those in poorer areas may not have easy access to internet and mobile banking. I highlight this point, Presiding Officer, as I recall that we recently debated here in this very chamber a motion in the name of Christina McKelvey regarding the current attitude of digital by default. I believe that this ties in well with what we are discussing today. But not only that, the case study by the Carnegie Trust on broadband uptake being as low as 90% in some cases, highlighting further, I believe, the need for a much valued local branch. A more general point I'd like to make is that the Financial Services Strategy document, the following was cited. The financial services sector accounts for 9.3% of Scottish jobs, employing 108,000 directly and almost 90,000 more in a range of related industries. Including other effects, this amounts to more than 220,000 jobs in Scotland. The closure of local branches in areas like Gourock and Shettleston can't possibly be a good thing. We tell people these days to shop locally, buy locally. Well, what about banking locally? Without local branches, local people won't have the opportunity to go to their local bank, discuss their banking issues with a friendly face. John Mason, I actually remember the RBS TV advert a number of years ago. No bank closures. Then this results in further questions of exclusion. People will need to pay for their transport to the nearest bank branch to discuss their banking issues. People who can't afford broadband or such can't bank online, and people like me who until recently had a dinosaur mobile phone can't bank on the go. It is less a question of want but necessity. Banking locally is something that is key to every community. I hope, therefore, that the worrying trend being set by RBS halts and there are no future closures anywhere in Scotland. Can I end once again by thanking John Mason for bringing this very important motion to the Chamber today. I think bank closures should be stopped. I don't agree entirely with all the comments made by Neil Finlay, but I do agree that banks should be working for local people. We do own the RBS and they should be working for us.
Many thanks. And I now call on Drew Smith to be followed by Stuart McMillan.
I'm grateful to you, Presiding Officer, and I thank Mr Mason for bringing this debate to the Chamber this afternoon, although I don't, of course, recognise any of the antagonism that he describes about East End of Glasgow politics. But as I say, I'm very grateful to him for ensuring that this matter is debated in the Scottish Parliament today. It hasn't escaped members' notice in this debate so far that the Royal Bank of Scotland is more than 80% owned by the taxpayer, and unfortunately, and despite this, it does not appear that this fact has led to the Royal Bank becoming any more responsive to the real needs of its customers, or indeed the people that Mr Mason and I represent in the East End of Glasgow. The rationale for the closure of the Shettleston branch on the 20th of June is, of course, that there is a declining number of customers who want to make use of a physical branch located in their own community. Many of us do increasingly use online applications to access banking services, whether by broadband internet connections at home or by smartphones or by any other means. However, I also know that when my colleague Margaret Curran, who's a local MP in Shettleston, and I know that John Mason would have raised this too, when he met with representatives of the Royal Bank of Scotland, they would have quoted the footfall figures which were collected and demonstrate that there are people using this branch at a rate of, I think, almost one a minute. It hardly sounds like the RBS are offering a moribund service from these cash counters, and John Mason described the queues that he has experienced on entering this branch. Presiding Officer, I think it's worth reflecting that there are good reasons why people are reliant upon this branch. The options which RBS seem to think will replace this service for local people are not, in fact, very likely options for very many people in the East End at all. I would have thought that a bank would seek to know its customers and its customers' circumstances as well as possible, but perhaps not understanding this is at least a partial explanation for the troubles that this bank has found itself in recent times. It is well known that digital inclusion in Glasgow is a story, in fact, of exclusion, and many of the customers of RBS and Shettleston will not be switching to an iPhone app, but they will be quite right if they do in fact switch bank. Likewise, at a time when there is so much debate about how we will ensure that those many people who don't currently have access to a bank account will access benefit payments in light of welfare reform changes, the decision of RBS will make things worse. And I think Richard Lyle was absolutely correct to highlight a recent debate on the CAB report on this subject, and I would refer the managers at RBS to perhaps go and ask for some advice from Citizens Advice Scotland about the impact that these changes will have in communities like Shettleston, and understand how difficult this decision from RBS will make the job of ensuring that people do have access to bank accounts. Presiding Officer, can I commend Sandy Hills Community Councils, and particularly the credit unions, who I think concerns have shown this in pretty stark relief against all of the other prevailing reasons of why we'd want to be encouraging credit unions to have a local credit union turning around and saying that an unthinking decision like this will seriously affect their ability to go on and provide the service to local people is extremely worrying. So I commend the Community Council, the Credit Union, and all of the area's political representatives for both Mr Mason's party and my own, and I would echo the call for RBS to change their mind. If they won't listen to their customers in Shettleston, Presiding Officer, perhaps they could try listening to their 70,000 shareholders in that area.
Thank you very much. I now call on Stuart McMillan, after which we'll move to the Minister for the closing speech. Mr McMillan, 4 minutes, please, or thereby.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I too want to congratulate my colleague John Mason for securing this important debate, and I have an account with the RBS, just wanted to get that on the record. Issues of store, factory or bank closures are always concerning, as they affect people's livelihoods as well as the local communities in which they actually reside. But the bank closures that have been highlighted this afternoon will certainly have a negative impact upon Gourock as well as Glasgow Shettleston. But certainly in terms of the Gourock perspective, by no means will it actually destroy the fabric of the town. And also the motion in front of us today also focuses upon the RBS. But I think it's important to actually kind of get on the record. It's not only the RBS who actually have been closing branches. The Nationwide Building Society, they're closing, or they have closed a branch of the Dunfermline Building Society over in Alexandria in the west of Scotland as well. So it's not only the RBS, other institutions are doing so as well. One of the key elements of a successful town centre can be that of a number of large high street branded stores that exist. And this can bring a sense of comfort to that particular locality. But Gourock bucks this trend. Many of the shops in the town are actually small independent traders. There are some larger chain operations, such as the post office as well as a couple of the bakers, but the others actually are independent traders. And this, I believe, actually augurs well for the future, as there is already a resilience and a pride in the town. The people of Gourock will deal with this sad news and will move on. That is the message that I've heard when I've been talking to people in the town regarding this particular closure. But it is disappointing that the closure is taking place. And after contacting the RBS, they informed me that the reason for doing so was that the numbers of the branch, people using the branch, have actually fallen by nearly 30% over the last few years, a point that's already been touched upon in this debate. Clearly, any business that actually has had a drop in numbers would rightly need to ask itself what it should do. However, before they actually get to that position of closing, I would suggest that they actually ask themselves what more they can do to make that business busier and more relevant to its customers, its former customers, and also potentially new customers. Now, I'm not aware of any of these issues actually being the case in this instance. However, I'm sure that certainly after today's debate, I'll probably receive some correspondence from the RBS telling me what they actually did try to do before they decided to close the Gourock branch. Post the closure, I do welcome the agreement taken with the Post Office to allow RBS customers to access their accounts, withdraw money, and also check their balances. But I do believe that it's actually too little, too late. And furthermore, when you actually consider the westwards population shift that has been taking place in Inverclyde for many years, not to mention the development work that's actually going to take place in Gourock, I would suggest that there's actually an opportunity to promote the branch more widely as a means to actually keep it open. I do accept the way that people actually bank these days is different from that of, say, 10, 20, 30 years ago. Much more is done online, and I do have an online account. However, there will be many people like me who actually don't want to do everything online, as well as there will be many people who actually are IT illiterate, and as a consequence, they are going to suffer with these particular closures. Many people commute daily from Gourock to work outside of Inverclyde. Gourock is also a gateway to Argyll for tourism, as well as being a tourism location in itself. And I genuinely cannot see how an RBS branch cannot exist in the town. Maybe a more imaginative opening time structure would have been able to keep the branch open. Maybe more promotion of the branch would have kept it open. Maybe the constant battering that the RBS has taken as a consequence of past reckless decisions is now showing the signs of a lack of confidence in the institution. Now, I know the RBS is working hard to get back to a healthy financial position. However, I ask its management to remember that if it wasn't those branches that took the bank to the brink. It wasn't the communities in our constituencies or regions that took it to the brink. It was others who were clearly out of touch with the high street. And in conclusion, Presiding Officer, I'm sure that the RBS representative who will be listening or watching today's debate, I gently ask them to think about this decision again. Stick by the people who have actually stuck by you in your hour of need, the taxpayer. Thank you very much.
Many thanks. I now call on Minister Fergus Ewing to close the debate on behalf of the Government. Minister, 7 minutes or thereby, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to begin by thanking John Mason for raising this motion, and I'm also aware this is an issue that he has previously raised in this Parliament with John Swinney in March, and I do understand the concerns that have been raised today by John Mason and by all the colleagues who have taken part in this debate today about the impact of branch closures in local communities throughout Scotland. Plainly, banks play a key role in our society and in local economies, and many ways in which they do so have been underscored by members in their contributions. We rely on banks in order to conduct our daily lives, and the Scottish Government is absolutely clear that customers must be at the heart of what banks do and the decisions that they make, and we have been very explicit about this in our banking strategy, about which I will say more later. I wanted to start off by really emphasising a point, Presiding Officer, which John Mason did make very clearly, and that is that my experience of meeting with bank staff, and recently I had the pleasure of meeting some bank staff in a branch of a bank in Inverness, is that they are unfailingly courteous, helpful, positive, and devoted to doing their very best for their work. And I wanted to make that point in quite a deliberate sense, because all of us here are debating problems which have arisen, but equally all of us recognise that the ordinary bank staff are the front line, the face of the bank. They are doing an excellent job for this country. And sometimes perhaps the brunt of criticisms of decisions or disquiet about decisions, or public disquiet that is felt about decisions taken by leadership of banks, are taken out on the frontline staff, who have had nothing whatsoever to do with them. So I think it behoves me as the Minister to start off by thanking all of the bank staff that do a great job around the country, committed to help ordinary customers, whether individuals and businesses. It has been mentioned, I think, by Mr Macmillan that following the financial crisis facing the banks, that they do have to address the long-term financial sustainability. There is no two ways about that. That is a task that needed to be tackled. And therefore we have to accept that reality, the reality of that task, that needs to be done. It's not an easy task. It's not one that anyone wished would be necessary, but necessary it is, and this involves reducing costs and taking difficult decisions. And I think that was alluded to by some of the speakers this evening. Of course, I'm acutely aware of some of the points that have been made by John Mason, that not everybody has access to the internet, not everybody has access to mobile banking. It is undoubtedly true that some people prefer to bank in a branch. Other people, perhaps those who are not comfortable with or able to use the internet, whether through the fact of their habits of a lifetime which they're unwilling to break, or whether through age, or whether through various physical impairments or difficulties which make it impossible to use these facilities. But nonetheless, I think it must be recognised that banking is changing, and it's changing dramatically. And in preparation of this debate, I did ask the Royal Bank to indicate their information about the way in which this is changing. As John Mason indicated, internet banking is such now that 50% of their customers are banking online. Not in Mr Mason's constituency, I accept. That was the point that he also made, and therefore the point that he made about the local facilities is of course relevant. Mobile apps, more than 1 billion transactions were carried out on mobile apps, more than 1 billion transactions. And RBS Group Customer Services handled more than 2 million phone calls in 2012. Increasingly, banks are looking at different ways of serving the public. ATMs we're now, of course, used to. Branches or mobile banks, points of presence in railway stations and so on may become more popular in future as people seek convenient solutions in busy lives. So I think it is undoubtedly the case that the nature of banking is changing, the practice of banking is changing. There is less call and less demand for the traditional format of banking services. Presiding Officer, that if I may say so, you or I may have grown up with in our earlier years, when none of these other things and none of these other forms of banking were possible. But the world changes, and when the world changes and the facts change, the nature of policy solutions and the nature of the way we address them accordingly must change as well. So we do recognise that the concerns which Mr Mason has expressed tonight are concerns which will be felt by some of his constituents. I also asked the Royal Bank to respond specifically to the issues about the location of the branch which is closed in Shettleston. The Royal Bank have advised in response that there are 7 alternative Royal Bank branches within 3 miles of the Shettleston branch, and Mr Mason referred, I think, to a post office that was located relatively nearby. I think Mr Macmillan said also in Gourock there is a post office fairly close to the branch in Gourock, which has been closed there now. I appreciate that these alternatives will not suit everybody. They will still leave constituents of both Mr Macmillan and Mr Mason and other members inconvenienced, and that these problems are not, therefore, to be dismissed whatsoever. They are real concerns, and I recognise those concerns. And I wanted to say that I'd be happy to raise any individual case or specific difficulties caused, either in Shettleston or Gourock, directly with the RBS, if either member wishes me to say so. Lastly, Mr Mason did want me to indicate the engagement we'd had with the Royal Bank, and I can say that I've met with the Royal Bank on 8th of January, the Deputy First Minister on the 9th of January, Angela Constance on the 7th of February, John Swinney and the Deputy First Minister on the 13th of February, John Swinney on the 28th of March, and the First Minister with Ross McEwen, CEO of UK Retail, on both the 18th of April and the 14th of May 2013. Now, at these meetings, a huge number of things were discussed, including an undertaking by the Royal Bank of Scotland that they will invest £26 million in their branches over the next 3 years. That refurbishment will bring a lot of work to tradesmen throughout this country. I appreciate that. I acknowledge that. I think that's a good thing. They're investing £175 million in total on improving services, on branch refurbishments, ATMs, cash and deposit machines, and £50 million in IT, and £450 million in IT hardware in Edinburgh data centres. Now, I appreciate, Presiding Officer, that none of these things will address, perhaps in any way, the problems that Mr Mason has raised today. Nonetheless, they are part, I think, of the wider picture, and for that reason, I think it's appropriate to mention it this evening. I'm grateful to members for highlighting one of the issues affecting banking matters in Scotland. It's right that they do so. It's right that they stand up for those of their constituents who are inconvenienced. I think, too, we also must recognise the difficulties facing the banks and recognise that there are good things which they are doing in this country, and be willing to acknowledge them and to thank them for that. And the last thing I would say is this. One member raised issues of bonuses. It is my personal opinion that bonuses are perfectly legitimate when they reward success, but when there is an absence of success, the awards of bonuses to top directors and a tiny minority of the employees of senior institutions, financial and others, causes extreme public disquiet, perhaps more than anything else.
Many thanks. And that concludes this evening's debate, and I now close this meeting of Parliament.